is a heartbreaker there, Danny, after such a good defensive effort.
Let's let this next game start if we can quickly show the fans. I think for a lot of people, where that ends is a little bit like you feel like you're worried. Where's the food, right? I'll feed you, baby birds. Let's bring up an analysis board when we can and show why that position was so lost. Because after King B8, I think White has to find a really, really subtle Rook C3, Danya, to show exactly why Black is completely busted. So
that's exactly right. I'm going to pull it up here.
We'll show that. Yeah.
Okay. See, there we go. So, yeah, you might say, hey, Black is up a pawn in the final position. But as you're pointing out, Danny, after the king drops back, we can bring up an analysis. Yeah, Rook C3, you ain't increasing the pressure on this pawn. And White's just going to collect these 2 pawns. And
I think it's important to show this because it's not every day Black resigns in a rook ending up a pawn. Let that sink in. White played rook c4 check, and Black resigns in a rook ending up a pawn. And so I think showing this is really instructive. This move rook c3, guard c3, and the house crumbles.
Crumbles.
There you go.
And just really quickly before we move on, the actual mistake for Gukesh was this move rook h6. Wrong priorities. He had to go king d8. King c7, and just in time you reach b7, and on the next move you work on your rook, but he can be forgiven. That's hard to figure out, at the drop of a hat with less than a minute against the Carlsen.
Well, here Gukesh will now get the white pieces again as we focus our attention once more on game 4. Hey, knock on the door. Rhyme time all day. Welcome to the SCC. It's the main event. As we said, 16 players are in a knockout. They're moving on for big prizes. Of course, if we get a tiebreaker, ultimately we have 1+1 for 4 games, and then Armageddon. If you missed Aronium winning in Armageddon, you haven't been watching the most exciting event since Sudden Death Dodgeball, and that's the SCC.
Yeah, go back and watch it, but only after this match, because plenty of entertainment left. Magnus back to a 1-point lead and a very kind of, gritty positional battle here in this Rosalima with both players pushing their pawns on either side. Magnus trying to drive the pawn up to a4, Danny, I think, to restrict the mobility of this knight and prevent knight b3. So maybe Gukesh should play this move while he still can.
It's funny. I always struggle in these positions as Black, as a Sicilian player, when you face a Rosalimo, because it just feels like it's only a matter of time before there's doubled c-pawns are the focus of the game. It's like being on the white side of a Nimzo, right? So help me understand what tension, what dynamics is Black trying to keep so that now, because b3, there's going to be bishop a3. And at some point, Black's going to play rook c1. And then if there's threats of c takes d5, where c5 is hanging, Black has to do something or those doubled c-pawns become the focus.
Yeah, and I'll preface by saying that I don't play the e6 Rosalima with Black precisely because these structures are really, really challenging. And I think purely objectively, White's probably better. But Black's got some things going for him on the other side of the board. First of all, this pawn chain is very, very strong. It's restricting the knight on f3. You've got the bishop pair. And at some point in the future, if you can get your knight somehow to f4, that's going to be a huge game changer, because then you're going to be able to apply pressure on d3. Of course, that's easier said than done. And that's precisely why Gukesh got his pawn to h5. I think a lot of people are like, oh, he's attacking. No, the pawn on h5 is fulfilling a purely defensive role. So you sometimes actually see Black pushing g5 to try to induce en passant. Instead, Magnus taking the alternate route. I don't know exactly where he's going, though, Danny. Yeah. If I'm Gukesh, I'm just going bishop a3, and I'm saying, hey, what's your plan?
And again, I played the Nimzo Indian for my entire career as Black, and this is a similar structure you see where Black has parted ways with the bishop pair in a Nimzo in order to get these long-term weaknesses. And here comes bishop a3. As we said, rook to c1 will at some point be on the board. Whether you take right away or not on d5, White has this constant threat of cashing in, and that might force Black to play d4, exactly. But if d4 comes, White can continue to maneuver and eventually try to capitalize against these double pawns. But maybe d4 ultimately is forced, and at the very least, White doesn't have a clear way to bring another attacker, right?
Ooh, I'm surprised. I thought d4 is at this point kind of a no-brainer, and now he plays it. And
okay, now he does it.
Yeah, he waited for Gukesh to put his rook on c1, because now the rook kind of just looks dumb.
But I think the eval board was revealing that Gukesh maybe missed a chance to take d5. I wonder if, because now that d4 has been played, Black is actually back in control. So again, for those who played this opening, or maybe some of our more advanced audience, you can back up and look at that. I think there's a lot of theory, a lot more subtlety there than maybe first meets the eye. And Magnus didn't hesitate to play d4 instantly when he had the second chance.
And I think the nature of Gukesh's misevaluation, he thinks that by playing d4, black is kind of untying white's hands for action on the king side. The problem is black is the one who's in charge on the king side. Even though white has more space right now, and white has the more obvious maneuvers, black will eventually put queen d7 castles, and eventually black is going to have ideas of f5 and ideas of bishop g4. So let's see who ultimately takes charge on the king side. That's where the battle is going to shift starting now. I would play knight h4 without delay if I'm Gukesh.
Agreed. Knight h4, before we even think about remaneuvering the knight on d2. Have they forgot about castling, Mr. Tonky? It's a funny question, but to be real about it, you might not only not see castling, it's possible you see black tuck the king on c7 even on the other side of the board and then completely shift everybody to a kingside expansion. I see Danya's eyebrows raising despite that early in the morning. I know you like what I'm preaching here.
I totally like what you're preaching. We're speaking the same language here, eating the same sandwiches. I think both kings might find their way to the queen side. But Danny, if white brings his king to c1, that pawn on b3 isn't entirely safe. I mean, there could be a sacrifice. We're talking like way down the line right now, but that's what you got to do. When the center is closed, you're switching from concrete calculation to more conceptual reasoning because it's hard to calculate concretely. There's just so many candidate moves on every move, and I think that's reflected in their time usage. Ooh.
Agreed.
Bishop c1.
Still a lot of pieces on the board for the time that is ticking away for these players. I kind of like the idea, as you're highlighting, of bringing the bishop to d2. But
Danny Carlsen.
On that note, Danny Carlsen striking, Magnus listening to my ideas. He's always listening to my ideas. He's going to put the king on c7, and then he's going to try to advance on the king side.
The one asterisk, he might go king c8 also to keep contact between the queen and the pawn. Sorry, go ahead.
Ooh, look at this. He's going to bring the knight to b4, which blocks the bishop's gaze on the a pawn. That's a tiny little maneuver there from that pony, making like a Luka Doncic Euro step. You know that when you do the Euro step in the NBA, it's basically moving like a knight? I thought about that the other day.
Kind of in an L shape. I can see that. I can
like
get behind
you're doing
that.
2 steps that looks like a travel, probably is a travel, but now that they haven't called it for 10 years, they can't start now. You know what I'm talking about, the Euro step.
Well, they only call it when Steph Curry does it, but not when Luka Doncic and James Harden does
here we
it.
go.
Steph Curry has the worst whistle in the NBA. But anyways.
Wow. Are you literally going to say Steph Curry has the worst whistle in the NBA? Oh, my gosh.
Of all the superstars,
how many championships do you have before you can complain?
He's won them in spite of his whistle.
Oh, my gosh. All right, moving on. We are not going to get into this. All right, bishop f7. That allows a diagonal.
A double take on g6, though. Isn't there tactic? Can't you win a pawn?
Let's show it. To the Batcave we go. Analysis board. HG, HG, knight g6, bishop g6, queen g4, baby girl. Oh, wait, what?
Yeah, I just took
okay. No, it's still good for white. Yeah,
just to show that the knight on h1 doesn't impact the mechanism. Did Magnus overlook that? And Danny, this is where something you said is so important. I think Gukesh has to do this quickly. You got to not overthink it and just trust. Yeah, Magnus missed this tactic. Don't drop yourself down to 20 seconds before you do it anyway.
Yep.
And he's gone queen g4 first.
That's a big difference because now if you take on g6, maybe black has rook g8. Oh, queen g8. I was thinking rook g8, but queen g8. Okay.
Either. Yep. I think big missed opportunity there. Gukesh just could have won a pawn. Now I think Magnus could go queen g8 anyway. And this is just a paper tiger. I mean, you don't have any way to increase the or this. You can never take on g6 anymore.
And this is exactly what you're saying. I think that in hindsight, when young players look at those opportunities again, and maybe that's why a guy with more experience like MBL was the only person ever to oust Magnus from the SEC, because he's played Magnus enough where he's like, look, I know you're better than me, but if you blunder, I'm not going to be afraid to call your BS, so to speak, right? I think young players second guess, and that was a clear tactic that we all saw very quickly, and Gukesh misses a chance to cash in, and it'll probably bite him if Magnus comes back and wins this game.
Although I do really, really like his last move, f4, fearless play on the king side. Magnus meets him at the top with f5, and we're about to see some major fireworks on the king side. G takes h5 is his idea, and then I think he's going to take on f4. Obviously, the queen is hanging, so you can't take the knight.
Wow. Wild stuff. Knight takes f4. This position is about to blow open.
But
who's Who's better at this? I know the eval bar is sitting there saying, "Oh, white's still going to be better," but from a practical point of view, I've about called you Magnus. Am I wrong to start feeling more nervous for white? That queen on d8 spies the knight on h4. That king on e1 is completely naked there. The emperor has no clothes.
Yeah,
I'm much more nervous to be white here than I am to be black, despite what the engine is saying.
totally. And Gukesh has to trade as many pieces as possible because positionally, black is worse. That bishop on f7 is a granite biter. It's biting on granite on one side and on the other. Although bishop takes c4 is a potential tactic in some cases because the rook on b2 is undefended. So I think objectively it's probably about balanced. And Gukesh has gotten this into a time scramble. Rook to e3. Oh, what a move by Magnus.
He sacrifices the exchange. The eval bar says white's better, but I'm looking at that pressure. This is where blunders happen. You ever wondering the bumper sticker, blunders happen? Blunders happen right here when you've got your king in the middle of the board.
But Gukesh keeping his composure, giving up the pawn on b3. And Danny, his idea was to prevent the bishops traveling to d4. White is now objectively much better. I don't see enough compensation here for the world champion.
That's surprising. Surprising if Magnus didn't have a concrete follow-up. That's not totally his style.
Yeah.
I think
rook b1 maybe. Ooh, he goes for the queen trade. I would take him to rook e3.
Do it. Oh, he doesn't. He plays knight f3, but taking in rook e3 was good.
No,
even so now, the queen's come off. There's two passed pawns in the middle of the board. Let's go, e5.
No, but Gukesh should have taken with a rook on e4. He gave up that pawn on c4, and he let the bishops get active, and now bishop e3 and bishop d3.
Wait, what?
Oh,
Wait,
he blundered.
Is he blundering the mating net?
Yep, bishop e3.
Oh, dude, rook b1, rook f1 was mate.
Oh my god, that was mate in two. You called it.
Rook b1, rook f1 was mate.
And he's going to have it again. He has it
rook
again.
Rook b1, rook f1.
Yeah, but bishop e3 is winning too. Just rook a1, rook a1. I'm surprised Magnus missed it. But
what in
bishop
the world
E3
just
was
happened
good enough.
there?